Awesome. Well, hello, everyone. I'm Brady Andrews. I'm a solution architect with Logicworks. With respect to the digital transformation question, I like to view it as any investment a company is making across 6 pillars of their footprint, whether that's the performance and operation efficiencies, the cost efficiencies of their supporting infrastructure, how sustainable that is or green, and then finally, how secure and reliable their platform is. I think weighing trade-offs across those 6 pillars really lets a company understand where their investments are going to ultimately support their end users and as well as their internal employees. So that could be moving from, I think previously mentioned, like paper to digital. So like GIS platforms, having physical maps, moving that to a digital application or database, or it could be someone that's already existing and maybe moves from on-prem to the cloud, or they're in the cloud and they improve their footprint there. So across those 6 pillars within the public cloud is where Logicworks really provides value with professional and managed services. We are a premier AWS partner, Azure Expert MSP, and Microsoft Gold partner. Our customers traditionally are hyper-regulated. So that involves PCI, HIPAA, HITRUST, SOC 1, SOC 2, all different compliance frameworks. There's some underlying frameworks that can be encompassed with things like HITRUST. So if you're like NEST 3 or MIST, those are still applicable. Today, I wanted to talk about a multi-account architecture setup and how to automate account creation and governance with the use of AWS Control Tower. So traditionally, different businesses, regardless of size, will have different business units, thus having different requirements, roles, and responsibilities. So there might be teams responsible for the client portal, compliance team, web app team, and accounting. Understandable that with a smaller team, these people wear multiple hats. But for the sake of when you're scaling, can't really do that with a small team. So we're going to make the assumption that we still have a large headcount. And so different levels of access to the IT stack could be OS level access, database access, billing access, console access. So these are all different things that don't need to be granted to every single person that is involved with your infrastructure. That's the principle of least privilege, and that's one of like the foundational rules to follow when looking at, like I said, your digital transformation. Traditionally in AWS, this is handled especially on smaller scale with a hub and spoke model. So you can separate different workloads with multiple VPCs. One of the problems being if you're scaling up, you can run into service limits and you're adding complexity by just adding VPC. It certainly does work. And as pictured here, you can see client portal access is just to the client portal VPC. Same for the web app VPC, with compliance having read-only access to both and accounting only looking at cost explorer. So there's certainly a way to do that and organize it. Just as you move into the mid-market and enterprise level customers, that level of complexity becomes very cumbersome and hard to manage. Not to mention also, not just prod, but pre-prod as well. So when you're adding different SDLC tiers, they certainly can exist inside the same VPC. But there are customers that want to completely separate prod from pre-prod at a network level. So adding in dev, stage, test, all these things are more manual processes to stand up those environments. And like Ron mentioned, cloud sprawl, it's hard to wrap your arms around this entire thing and really not make any mistakes through the life cycle of these environments. Similar to that first slide showing the different groups of users and their levels of access that they would need, you can actually separate these out by account, and you don't need to have, again, assuming that we don't have a really small bench that wears multiple hats, you don't have to have people from client portal dev, like a junior developer, with the same access to the web app production of maybe a senior engineer. Additionally, with customers that have compliance frameworks, if you are doing it with just VPCs, and that's how you're isolating your network or segmenting it, when you're going through the audit scope, you have to do everything whenever it's just VPCs, when it's under one account. The time that will take is significantly shorter if you're segmenting everything by account instead of just by VPC. So you can stand up just your PCI related account, and everything that's not in scope is a different account. And so that time is much shorter. So yeah, why multiple accounts? I think we covered it a little bit with having multiple SDLC tiers, isolation between the engineers that are involved in each of those SDLC tiers, limited visibility and discoverability of workloads, and minimize blast radius. This is really with the cross-account access that is not enabled by default whenever you do separate by account. So for some reason, if like your web app has a breach, it's not going to affect your backend, like your accounting, your billing, your client portal was previously mentioned. Business units, there's not going to be that cross-account visibility. This is really where Control Tower comes in. And I like to do a small, very small history lesson of landing zones was the predecessor. So AWS did recognize that this multi-account architecture was a foundational piece that customers should look at with larger migrations. And so the predecessor was landing zones. It was not as user-friendly. There was pipelines that you had to manage every time you did upgrades. And additionally, you had to go to a partner to start that process. Control Tower is a much more predefined, user-friendly successor to landing zones. When a Control Tower deployment is stood up, there's going to be 4 main accounts: a master account, shared services, logging, and security. There's not going to be any workloads sitting in the master account. Shared services are things like your directory services. There is a default VPC in there, but moving forward with expansion, you would not want to use the default VPCs, as certain security and auditing guardrails aren't there by default. So that's why in like logging and security, you can see it says no default VPC. But going through these accounts, as you're expanding, you can make sure that things like CloudTrail is enabled, VPC flow logs are going to S3, AWS config is enabled, and certain IAM roles per, similar to the first slide, like those different business units are corresponding to where they, the people that will actually be interacting with it. The master account's really going to sit with the backbone of Control Tower of Lambda, organizations, service catalog, and it says account vending machine, but that's now account factory. So with those 4 initial accounts that are launched, Logicworks also likes to implement a network account and a billing account. The real sweet spot is that network account by default with Logicworks. And this is a kind of a real life use case of what that would look like. So with 2 data centers on-prem connecting to the AWS environment, we have different accounts: security logging network, shared account, application account, with corresponding services like IDS and IPS, vulnerability scanning in the security account, S3 for logging, redundant Cisco CSRs and networking, and like Bastion servers in Active Directory and the shared services account, so you don't have to deploy those multiple times, and then separate application accounts. With automation, orchestration, all these things that as we scale up, we want to introduce because it makes life easier, it eliminates human error, and it saves time. I think that wrapping your arms around your cloud environment, whether it's you're initially migrating there with a large footprint or you're already there and you feel like, I'm looking at my bill, it's going up, I'm not really sure why. I don't really understand what I need to decommission, that cloud sprawl. Having an automated approach to expanding and starting out, I'd say, with your arms wrapped around it and having that control, that's really going to be what on the previous slide where it said vending machine and now factory. That's the piece of automation that's really powerful. Works with service catalog, Lambda, AWS organizations, and that can be CloudFormation or Terraform. So if you're like a multi-cloud company and you're using Azure, GCP, AWS, and you prefer Terraform, that stacks up will work as well. So as you expand, you can make sure CloudTrail and configure enabled again, the encryption status, the roles and responsibilities. So whether it's admin role, read-only role, all of those are a predefined way to expand over time, eliminating all that manual configuration and time to value and setting up a new environment. Also, this can be used for, like we said earlier, you can separate compliant and non-compliant accounts. You can have compliant, essentially templates, so that when you're setting up those new environments, you have peace of mind knowing that, let's say I'm a PCI customer, my new accounts, these ones I just stood up, are going to be PCI compliant. Really big use case for Control Tower is single tenant SaaS companies, primarily because there's separate instances they can have separate accounts for. And so there's no more giant monolith where you're sifting through who utilized what resources and what we need to charge back. And that's a really great feature of the cross-account billing with Control Tower. I like to not only view this as just, what if this was in the SaaS world and I can see, okay, account 1, 2, I could see customer 1, 2, 3. But what if we aren't a SaaS company? Okay, well, you might see that $5.14 as the web app dev environment, and you can decommission those resources. Those aren't long-standing. So it's not only something that's applicable to SaaS environments, but it is something that's a really cool feature for the single tenant SaaS companies for chargebacks. A case study we had was with a mortgage bank that had limited staff and a short timeline for their migration. They were a PCI compliant customer. They did not want to exist or disrupt their existing pipeline, but they ultimately lacked the experience in security and compliance on AWS. After an assessment and a design, we rebuilt their environment in a Control Tower, conforming to best practices. After go live, they elected to bring in Logicworks for 24/7 support, patching, backups, incident response, and monitoring, as well as regular engineering and billing reviews. So it takes a lot of that day-to-day, keeping the lights on activities out of their hands so they could focus 100% of their time on new product features and member acquisition. Their environment has maintained 100% availability while reducing both infrastructure and in-house staffing costs by 10 and 80% respectively. Just summarize some high-level points about Control Tower. With the account factory and the automated templatized approach to expanding, as well as the governance through automation, those are huge pros that you should weigh, whether you're a compliant customer or not, whether you're a SaaS customer or not. But really, the size of your environment should be a leading indicator of whether or not you should implement something like Control Tower, or if staying with the traditional VPC network segmentation and hub and spoke model is for you. It can still work. It's still good. But that's a high-level summary. Logicworks is a built-on Control Tower partner and has much experience with setting up Control Tower environments, whether they're compliant or not following a compliance framework, whether it's you're migrating to the cloud or already in the cloud, and maybe going for SOC 2 compliance is one of your goals in the next 6 months. These are all discussions that we have pretty regularly. And if you have questions around Control Tower or migrating, or maybe like different opinions on cloud versus cloud when you're migrating an on-prem application, those are all things that myself and Mike here always talk about with customers. So please feel free to reach out and contact us, and I'll open it up to questions.